In today's video, I want to talk about why the most valuable skill in tech isn't on anyone's resumes right now, and I want to start with a story. I was on a call with a major mesh Wi-Fi vendor that I work with, and I was asking what I thought was a simple question. We deploy their devices across multifamily properties. These are like buildings, condos, the kinds of places where every unit gets one of these devices. And each one of those gateways, or Wi-Fi gateways, broadcasts an IoT network. It's the same network name across the entire property from every single device. That allows the building's smart locks, sensors, thermostats to join to a single network name. They don't have to go around and program every single one. But what I wanted to know as the provider of that network was how many clients were on the IoT network? Was that number growing? What did it look like over time? The vendor's answer to that was no. It wasn't that hard. It wasn't let me check. It was no, there's no way to do that. Their system treated each network as an independent thing. It didn't know that the IoT network in Unit 100 was the same IoT network in Unit 101, that they were siblings in the same building. I would have to do it by hand, property by property, and even then I wouldn't be able to get history over time. And they were right. Their system couldn't do it, but the answer wasn't in their system. If you're Gen X, you know this, but if you're under 40, MacGyver was a TV show where a guy was able to defuse bombs with a Swiss Army knife and a stick of gum. The running joke was always the improvised gadgets, the paper clip that would become a lockpick, the chocolate bar that would be used to plug a sulfuric acid leak. But the gadgets weren't the point. The point was that MacGyver had this shallow but broad knowledge of chemistry, physics, mechanics, and electronics, plus the pattern recognition to know which principle applied to the problem in front of him. He didn't need to be the world's best chemist. He just needed to remember that in that moment, that sugar and potassium chlorate made smoke. The most valuable skill in tech right now isn't depth in one thing. It's the ability to see connections between things that don't obviously belong together. If you're Gen X, you've been doing this since you were 10. So here's what I actually did with that vendor problem. Their API knew the client count on every individual network. It just treated each network as unrelated to every other one. Meanwhile, our internal systems at our company knew exactly which networks belonged to which property because we're the ones who deployed them. That mapping existed, it just lived somewhere else. So what I did was, with the help of Claude Code, wrote a Python script. I pulled the client counts from the vendor's API, pulled the property to network mapping from our internal data, and I joined them on a naming pattern. And I aggregated it over time, and Claude Code showed me how to graph it. The vendor saw networks as independent. Our internal data knew they were siblings. Neither system could produce the answer alone. Joining the two created a measurement that didn't exist in either place. The graph existed. The thing that was impossible took an afternoon. Okay, so I want to be careful here. I'm not telling a story because to make it sound like I knew something special. Anyone could do this. This wasn't a flash of genius. It was just inventory. I knew the vendor had an API because I'd poked at it before doing something unrelated. I knew the internal property data existed, or I knew the people who knew it because I'd worked with them for so many years. And I knew just enough Python to glue the two things together with the help of Claude Code. Now, none of those three things is remarkable on its own. The skill is noticing that they could touch. And here's the thing, that noticing, that's a muscle, and you've had it forever. When we were kids, we wanted our bikes to sound like motorcycles. So we would grab wooden clothespins and baseball cards off our bedroom floors. We would clip the card to the frame so it hit the spokes. Rode around the neighborhood sounding vaguely like Evel Knievel. Nobody showed us how. There was no YouTube video. There was no one to ask. We had a problem. Bikes were too quiet, and we had the parts. Clothespins from the laundry room, cards from the shoebox under the bed. The combination wasn't obvious until someone tried it, and then it spread across the block in an afternoon. That's the whole thing right there, a problem nobody assigned. Parts that weren't designed for the job. A solution that only existed because someone saw two unrelated things as connectable. As Gen Xers, we grew up with the dial turned way down on supervision and way up on figuring it out. We built forts out of whatever was in the yard. We made up games and rules that evolved as we went. We took things apart to see how they worked, and sometimes we put them back together. And with our Ataris, if they didn't work, we blew on the cartridge because someone's older brother said so, and it usually worked, and nobody could tell you why. We didn't have a manual for most of childhood, but we had the parts and we had time. Then the tech eras came one after another, analog to digital, mainframe to PC to cloud, pre-internet to internet to mobile to AI, and each one of those loaded with a new set of parts that would go into our bin. But the muscle was already there. The eras gave us the inventory. Childhood gave us the instinct to use it. Our younger colleagues often have sharper depth on the current stack. Older ones sometimes aren't touching it at all. Gen X sits in the middle with more eras loaded and still active hands on the keyboard, and with a lifetime of practice at the move that matters, noticing that two things nobody put next to each other could go next to each other. And AI is an accelerant to all of this. Not because it replaces thinking, it doesn't. The combinatorial insight, the wait, those things could touch moment still has to come from us. AI collapses the distance between an idea and a working version of it. The MacGyver move used to require knowing enough not to waste a day on a dead end. Now you can try and hit dead end in 10 minutes. You can go from first principles to something running through rapid try and fail loops that weren't possible before. So for someone with a full parts bin and decades of pattern recognition, that's not a threat. That's a force multiplier. You're not competing with the tool. You've been training for it since you were clipping baseball cards to your spokes. Look, if you're mid-career or you're like me, you're end of mid-career, and you're worried about falling behind on the shiny new thing, you might be looking at the wrong scoreboard. The question isn't whether you know the latest framework. It's whether you can look at the problem and see which three things in your parts bin combine to solve it. We already have that skill. We've had it since we were 10. The industry is finally building tools that reward it. Thanks for listening.